Ever feel like the world just forgot you were there? That was me last October. Specifically, October 27th. A Tuesday. The kind of damp, gray afternoon in the city that seeps into your bones. Rain hadn't fallen yet, but the threat hung thick in the air, smelling of wet concrete, decaying leaves, and something vaguely metallic. The light was already fading at 4 p.m., casting long, distorted shadows across the brick walls of my new apartment building. Well, newish. I'd been here 3 months. Still felt like a stranger. My name's Leo Evans. And I was adrift. Profoundly, achingly adrift. 6 months before, the scaffolding of my life had collapsed. My marriage gone. Not with a bang, but a slow, suffocating whisper of resentment and misunderstandings. We sold the house, the one with the sunny kitchen where Sarah used to sing off-key while making pancakes. I took this cramped one-bedroom on the edge of the historic district, surrounded by buildings older than my grandparents. It was supposed to be a fresh start. It felt more like exile. The silence here wasn't peaceful, it was accusatory. It echoed with the ghost of conversations Sarah and I should have had, the laughter we'd stopped sharing. My days were a blur of remote work, takeout containers, and staring out the grimy bay window at the fire escape opposite mine. Watching life happen in other people's lit-up rectangles. Feeling utterly unseen. That's when I first saw her. Not clearly. Just a flicker. A smudge of movement in the deepening gloom of the alleyway below my window. I was rinsing a coffee mug, the lukewarm water doing little to wash away the lethargy. My gaze, perpetually unfocused, snagged on it. Something dark, low to the ground, slipping soundlessly behind a cluster of overflowing trash bins. A stray cat? The neighborhood had a few. But this felt different. Less furtive scavenger, more a shadow given form. I leaned closer to the cold glass, fogging it slightly with my breath. Nothing. Just the usual urban detritus and gathering twilight. I shook my head, chalking it up to tired eyes and an overactive imagination fueled by loneliness. See things long enough in the silence, Leo, and you'll start seeing things that aren't there. But she came back. Not that night, but the next. And the one after. Always at the edges. Always vanishing before I could get a proper look. A silhouette darting across the top of the high brick wall that separated our building's tiny, neglected courtyard from the alley. A fleeting shape, impossibly quiet, disappearing into the gap beneath Mrs. Henderson's overgrown lilac bush on the ground floor. She moved with an eerie grace, a liquid smoothness that seemed to defy gravity. Never a sound. No meow, no rustle, no scrape of claws. Just presence, then absence. I started calling her the ghost cat. Silly, right? But it fit. She was less an animal, more a rumor made flesh. Whispers started to passing snippets I'd catch in the lobby, or while taking out my own trash. Old Mr. Peterson, who'd lived here since the 60s, mentioned seeing a shadow cat near the boiler room. Mrs. Henderson complained about muddy paw prints appearing mysteriously on her pristine back steps, despite her own ancient tabby, Marmalade, being strictly indoors. The young couple in 3B swore they saw a black cat perched impossibly high on the roof ledge one moonlit night, staring down with unsettlingly bright eyes. Nobody could get close. Nobody knew where she came from or where she went. She was our building's phantom. A shared secret, slightly unsettling, mostly ignored. And then, one rain-lashed Thursday night, I saw her properly. Close. I was restless. Couldn't sleep. The drumming rain on the fire escape outside my bedroom window was both soothing and oppressive. I got up, drawn to the living room window overlooking the alley and the courtyard. The single security light attached to the building cast a weak, jaundiced circle on the wet pavement below. And there, just at the edge of that sickly light, sheltered partially under the sagging eave of the old garage, she sat. Not a shadow. A cat. A small, slender cat, fur plastered dark and sleek by the rain. Not pure black, I realized. More a deep, smoky charcoal, like ashes after a fire. Her ears were large, pointed, giving her an alert, almost alien look. But it was her stillness that struck me. Utterly motionless. Not hunched against the rain, not shivering. Just sitting, watching the rain fall. Her tail was curled tightly around her paws, a perfect, wet comma. And her eyes, they caught the feeble light and reflected it back, not with the usual cat eye shine, but with a strange, flat, pale green luminescence. Like chips of sea glass found on a dark beach. She turned her head, slowly, deliberately, and looked up. Not randomly. Not at the window next to mine or the one below. Directly at my window. At me, standing half-hidden in the dark of my apartment. My heart stuttered. It felt like being seen for the first time in months. Truly seen. Not as Leo Evans, the recently divorced guy trying to disappear, but as something present. Something noticed. Her gaze held mine for a long, impossible moment. There was no fear in it, no aggression, just an unnerving intensity, a quiet assessment. Then, with that liquid grace, she rose, stretched one long hind leg with an almost balletic poise, and melted back into the darkness beneath the lilac bush. Gone. I stood there for a long time, the chill from the window seeping into my skin, the ghost of those pale green eyes imprinted on my vision. The loneliness that usually pressed in felt different. Not less, exactly, but shared somehow. Observed. The rain whispered secrets against the glass. The city hummed its indifferent song. And in the damp, forgotten courtyard below, a phantom had looked back at me. Something had shifted. Something quiet, deep inside the silence. A question had formed, not just about the cat, but about the unseen things in my own life. The things hiding in the shadows of my heart. The hunt had begun. Not just to capture her on video, but to understand why this ghostly creature felt like the first real thing I'd encountered in months. Why her silent presence felt like a lifeline thrown into my gray, drifting world. The quiet shift was a tremor in the foundation of my solitude. Properly seeing her change something. The phantom had become real, tangible. A small, wet, intensely green-eyed reality existing just beyond my window pane. That shared moment of eye contact, it lingered. It wasn't warmth, exactly. More like recognition. Two solitary creatures acknowledging each other across the damp, urban divide. The next few days became a quiet obsession. My gaze was constantly drawn to that window. The grimy bay window overlooking the alley and the neglected courtyard wasn't just a view anymore. It was a stage. My work-from-home setup migrated permanently to the small table beside it. Spreadsheets blurred as I scanned the shadows beneath Mrs. Henderson's lilac bush, the top of the brick wall, the dark gap beneath the old garage eave. The gray October light seemed perpetually suspended, mirroring my own state of limbo. The ache of Sarah's absence was still there, a low thrum beneath everything, but now, there was a focal point outside of myself. A mystery that demanded attention. Where did she go? Where did she come from? Why choose this crumbling courtyard? I started keeping notes. Ridiculous, maybe. But the silence in the apartment needed filling, and my thoughts were too loud. October 28th, 4:15 p.m., brief sighting near trash bins. Charcoal fur. Moved towards garage. No sound. October 29th, early a.m. Possible paw prints, small, neat, on damp steps near lilac bush. Distinctive, not like Marmalade's broader prints. It wasn't scientific. It was connection. A way to prove she wasn't just a figment of my loneliness. Then came the first offering. Instinct, I suppose? Or maybe just the echo of feeding Sarah's old tabby, Morris, who'd stayed with her in the divorce. Morris loved tuna. On a damp Saturday morning, after another fruitless hour of staring at spreadsheets, I opened a can. The sharp, briny smell filled my small kitchen. I ate half, mechanically. Then, on an impulse I didn't fully understand, I scooped the rest onto a small, clean saucer. The courtyard air was cold and damp, smelling of wet earth and decaying leaves. I placed the saucer just outside my ground floor window, on the narrow strip of concrete ledge beneath the bay. Far enough out that I could watch from inside without looming. Then I retreated, heart doing a funny little skip. It felt absurdly vulnerable. Like putting a message in a bottle and tossing it into a silent sea. Hours passed. The tuna sat untouched, glistening under the gray sky. Cars slushed by on the wet street. Mrs. Henderson shuffled past with her shopping cart, casting a curious glance at the saucer but saying nothing. Doubt crept in. Stupid, Leo. She's a ghost. Ghosts don't eat tuna. The familiar weight of disappointment settled, heavier for the brief spark of hope. I turned back to my laptop, the word swimming. Movement. So subtle I almost missed it. From the dense, dripping shelter of the lilac bush, a shadow detached. Not a dash, but a slow, deliberate glide. She emerged like smoke coalescing. Charcoal fur, damp but not soaked. Those large, pointed ears swiveled independently, scanning the courtyard. Her pale green eyes fixed on the saucer. Not hungrily, but with intense, wary focus. She approached not head-on, but in a low, cautious arc, hugging the brick wall. Every muscle was taut, ready to vanish. She paused 3 feet away, statue still. Her gaze lifted, sweeping the windows, mine, Mrs. Henderson's above, the empty one beside mine. Assessing the threat. My own breath felt trapped in my chest. I didn't dare move, barely blinked. This wasn't just about the food. This was about trust. A tiny, fragile negotiation happening on a cold concrete ledge. She took 1 step closer. Then another. Her nose twitched, testing the air. Another eternity passed. Finally, with a movement so swift it blurred, she darted forward, snatched a single, tiny piece of tuna in her mouth, and retreated just as fast, back to the edge of the lilac bush. She didn't eat it immediately. She placed the morsel carefully on the ground, watched it for a moment, then devoured it in 2 delicate bites. Only then did she return. This time, she approached the saucer directly, though her body remained low, poised for flight. She ate. Not ravenously, but with a quiet efficiency. Small, precise bites. Her head dipped, rose, dipped again. I could see the muscles working in her slender jaw. See the faint ripple of her ribs beneath the wet fur. She was thin. Too thin. This wasn't a ghost. This was a survivor. She cleaned the saucer meticulously, licking every trace of oil. Then, instead of vanishing immediately, she sat back on her haunches, just for a moment. She looked up, directly at the window, at me, still frozen inside. Her green eyes held mine, and then she blinked. Slowly. deliberately. Twice. A cat's slow blink. It wasn't affection. Not yet. But it wasn't fear either. It felt like acknowledgement. A silent "I see you too." Then, with her usual liquid grace, she turned and slipped soundlessly back beneath the lilac bush. Gone. The saucer sat empty, gleaming faintly. I felt seen. Truly seen. And strangely, profoundly grateful. That small, shared ritual, the offering, the cautious acceptance, the silent blink, it pierced the fog of my isolation in a way nothing else had. It wasn't about Sarah, or the divorce, or the echoing apartment. It was about this moment, this small, wild creature choosing, however tentatively, to accept something from me. My hand trembled slightly as I reached out later to retrieve the saucer. It felt warm, somehow. The tuna became a ritual. Every morning around 9 a.m., after my first futile hour of work, I'd open the window just a crack. The cold air would rush in, smelling of city and damp. I'd place the saucer on the ledge. Sometimes tuna, sometimes a bit of plain chicken, sometimes a spoonful of wet cat food I'd bought on impulse, feeling slightly foolish. The phantom became a fixture. Not always visible, but her presence was felt. The saucer would be empty when I checked. Paw prints, faint but distinct, would appear on the ledge or the damp ground below. Small, neat, purposeful. I started talking to her, quietly, through the glass. Just murmurs. "Morning, phantom. Bit chilly today, huh? Hope you like the chicken." It felt less silly each time. It filled the silence with something other than regret. I learned her patterns. She preferred the early morning or the deep twilight. She avoided the middle of the day when the courtyard might see more foot traffic. She never made a sound. Not a meow, not a purr. Her communication was all eyes and stillness and those deliberate movements. One drizzly afternoon, I saw her stretch. Properly. She emerged from the lilac bush, surveyed the empty courtyard, then arched her back in a long, luxurious curve, front paws extended, claws flexing briefly against the wet concrete. Then the hind end, a deep, satisfying stretch that made her whole body ripple. It was a moment of pure, unguarded feline contentment. A small, private victory against the damp and the hardship. I found myself smiling. A real smile. It felt foreign on my face. The connection deepened in tiny increments. One day, instead of retreating after eating, she sat on the ledge, just beyond the empty saucer. She meticulously cleaned a front paw, running it over her ear and face with fastidious care. She was close. Closer than she'd ever been while I was visibly present. I sat perfectly still inside, barely breathing, watching the intricate ritual. The texture of her fur, still damp in patches, looked incredibly soft. I could see a faint white smudge on her chest, like a tiny star. And a nick, a small scar, just above her left eyebrow. Signs of a life lived on the edge. She finished her grooming, gave me one of those slow, assessing blinks, and vanished. But she'd stayed. Voluntarily. In my presence. It stirred something deep within me. Watching her resilience, her wariness, her careful negotiation of trust, it mirrored my own fractured state. I carried the weight of failure. The feeling that I hadn't seen Sarah's unhappiness soon enough, hadn't fought hard enough, hadn't been enough. The guilt was a constant companion, heavier than the loneliness. Seeing the phantom navigate her world with such quiet dignity, despite the scars and the thinness, it didn't erase my pain, but it reframed it. Survival looked different on her. Maybe it could look different on me too. Not thriving, not yet, but enduring, finding moments to stretch in the drizzle. Then came the night of the storm, a proper autumn gale roaring in off the river. Wind howled around the old building, rattling the window panes in their frames. Rain lashed horizontally, turning the courtyard into a dark, churning pool. Inside, the usual silence felt oppressive, amplified by the fury outside. My small apartment felt like a ship adrift in a black sea. The ache of missing Sarah, the guilt, the sheer aloneness of it all crashed over me with the force of the storm. I sat huddled on the sofa, arms wrapped around myself, staring at nothing, tears welling hot and sudden. Months of holding it in, of the gray numbness, cracked open. I wept. Quietly at first, then with heaving sobs I couldn't control, shoulders shaking. The storm drowned out the sound, but the desolation inside was deafening. I don't know how long I cried. Minutes? An hour? Exhausted, I finally lifted my head, wiping my face with a rough sleeve. The room was dark, lit only by the erratic flashes of lightning. My gaze, blurred and swollen, drifted automatically to the window. The rain streamed down the glass, distorting the view of the courtyard into watery streaks of yellow from the security light. On the narrow concrete ledge outside, pressed as close as possible to the glass, seeking what meager shelter the overhanging bay window offered, was a small, dark shape. The phantom. She was soaked. Her charcoal fur plastered flat, making her look even smaller, more fragile. Water streamed off her, but she was there, hunched against the wind and rain, her back to the storm, facing inwards, towards me. Her pale green eyes, reflecting the lightning flashes, were fixed on the spot where I sat crying. Not judging, not frightened by the storm outside, it seemed. Just present, watching, a silent witness to the storm inside. I froze. My breath hitched. The raw vulnerability of the moment was staggering. Here I was, utterly broken open, and there she was, this wild, elusive creature, choosing this moment, this storm, to be close. Not demanding food. Not seeking shelter inside. The window was closed, and she made no move towards it. Sharing the ledge. Sharing the storm. Her presence felt like a quiet anchor in the chaos. An unspoken understanding passed between us, thicker than the glass. Two battered souls, riding out their respective tempests, finding a strange kind of solidarity on a rain-lashed ledge. She didn't move. She just sat, a small, wet statue of resilience, her eyes holding mine in the flashing dark. The storm raged on, but inside the silent space between us, something small and fragile and utterly real had taken root. The quiet surprise wasn't a touch or a sound. It was simply her choice to be there, to witness, to endure together. The storm broke something open, in me and between us. After that rain-lashed night, the phantom didn't vanish back into pure myth. She became bolder. Or perhaps, I became someone she could afford to be bolder around. The ledge outside my bay window wasn't just a feeding station anymore. It was a neutral territory, a place of truce. She'd appear more frequently, not just at dawn or dusk, but sometimes mid-morning, when weak November sun struggled through the grime. She'd eat, then linger, sitting on the cold concrete, meticulously cleaning a paw, or simply gazing out at the damp courtyard with those unsettlingly calm, pale green eyes. Sometimes she'd even curl up there, a compact, charcoal comma, seemingly asleep, though I knew one ear always twitched, tracking the distant city sounds. I started leaving the window open a crack. Just an inch. Enough for the damp, cold air to seep in, carrying the scent of wet brick and decaying leaves, but also enough for connection. She never tried to come in. Not once. But she'd sit closer to the opening, her fur occasionally ruffled by the breeze. One frosty morning, I dared to rest my hand on the sill, just inside the open crack. She watched it, unblinking, for a long moment. Then, with infinite slowness, she stretched her neck forward and delicately sniffed my fingertips. Her nose was cold, damp. The touch was feather-light, electric. She didn't recoil, just to process the scent. Salt, skin, the faint tang of coffee and lingering sadness. She gave one of her slow blinks. It felt monumental. Life settled into a new, strange rhythm. Solitude. Phantom rituals. The gnawing ache for Sarah was still there, a familiar bruise, but the phantom's quiet presence acted like a balm. I found myself talking to her more. Not just greetings, but fragments of my day. Stupid things. Traffic was awful on the virtual call today, phantom. Everyone arguing over fonts. Or, Mrs. Henderson's lilac bush looks like it's finally given up the ghost. Like everything else out there. She'd listen, or seem to, her ears swiveling minutely, her gaze steady. She became my silent confessor, the one who witnessed my small triumphs, finally fixing the dripping tap, and my lingering stumbles, burning toast again. She never judged. She just existed beside me, a small, wild anchor in my drifting world. Then came the scratching. It started subtly, a faint, intermittent scraping sound, drifting up from somewhere below. At first, I dismissed it. Old building, settling noises, pipes groaning. But it had a rhythm, the persistence. Scritch, 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 scritch. Always at night. Deep in the quiet hours, when the city's hum faded to a murmur and my own thoughts grew loudest. It wasn't frantic, like a trapped animal. It sounded deliberate, purposeful, like someone trying to wear away stone with a fingernail. I'd lie awake in the dark, listening. The sound seemed to emanate from the direction of the old garage, tucked into the corner of the courtyard, or maybe the thick brick wall beside it. It echoed faintly in the well of the space outside. It set my teeth on edge. Not with fear, exactly, but with a growing, prickling curiosity laced with something else. A strange sense of dread I couldn't name. One night, driven by a restlessness that matched the scratching's rhythm, I got up. Silently, I moved to the bay window, peering down into the moon-washed courtyard. There she was. The phantom. Not on the ledge. Down below, near the base of the thick brick wall separating our courtyard from the alley. She was standing on her hind legs, front paws braced against the rough brickwork. Her body was stretched taut, muscles straining under her charcoal fur. And she was scratching. Methodically. Not randomly. In one specific spot, about a foot off the ground. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Her claws dragged against the mortar and brick with that same persistent, grating sound. Her head was tilted back slightly, those pale green eyes fixed intently on the spot she was working on. The moonlight caught her profile, the intense focus, the slight flare of her nostrils. She looked determined, haunted, almost. She didn't stop when she sensed me. She didn't even glance up. She just kept scratching. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I watched, frozen, a cold finger tracing its way down my spine. This wasn't random behavior. This felt ritualistic. Like she was trying to dig her way through to something. Or remembering something. The peaceful rhythm we'd established fractured. Questions bloomed like dark ink in water. Why there? What was she trying to reach? Or escape? The scratching became a nightly soundtrack to my insomnia. It wormed its way into my daytime thoughts, too. I found myself staring at that section of wall during the day. It looked utterly ordinary. Aged brick, crumbling mortar in places, stained by decades of city grime and weather. Nothing remarkable. Yet, every night, the phantom returned to it with single-minded focus. My curiosity curdled into a low-grade anxiety. It felt intrusive, this compulsion she had. It echoed something unsettled within myself. The wall became a symbol. Of what? I didn't know. Conflict stirred. Internal, mostly. The safe, quiet connection we'd built felt threatened by this strange, obsessive behavior. I wanted the comforting routine back. The shared meals, the silent companionship. Not this nightly reminder of something unresolved, something potentially painful lurking beneath the surface of our fragile bond. It forced me to confront my own unresolved pain. The photo. Sarah's photo. I hadn't looked at it in months. Couldn't. It was tucked away, buried at the back of my sock drawer, a coward's archive. A snapshot from a happier time. Sarah laughing on a beach, hair whipped by the wind, eyes crinkled at the corners. Pure, unguarded joy. Seeing it now felt like pressing on a bruise that had just started to fade. The guilt surged back, hot and acidic. Had I silenced that laugh? Had my own preoccupations, my own failures, eroded that joy until nothing was left? The scratching downstairs seemed to mirror the frantic scraping inside my own chest. We were both fixated on walls, weren't we? Hers physical, mine emotional. Both seemingly impenetrable. One crisp, cold afternoon, the phantom surprised me. She'd eaten her chicken and was lingering on the ledge, enjoying a weak patch of sunlight. On impulse, I slid the bay window open wider than usual. Not enough to invite her in, but enough to create a larger opening. She watched the movement, ears pricked, but didn't retreat. I carefully, slowly, placed Sarah's photo on the inside sill, just beyond the open window. Not facing her directly, but angled so it caught the light. I didn't know why I did it. A bizarre urge to share the weight? To see if she'd react? To test the boundaries of this strange communion? The phantom's gaze shifted from me to the photo. Her stillness deepened. Not the relaxed stillness of sunbathing, but the frozen alertness of a predator assessing prey. Her pale green eyes scanned the image. Sarah's laughing face. The wind-blown hair. The carefree posture. The phantom's head tilted slightly. One ear flicked. Then, slowly, deliberately, she rose from her curled position. She took one step closer to the open window, her body low, cautious. She sniffed the air near the photo. Not the photo itself, but the space around it. Her nostrils flared. Her gaze remained fixed on Sarah's image. There was no recognition in her eyes, not as we understand it. But there was intensity, a deep, unnerving focus. And then, something shifted. Her ears flattened slightly, not in aggression, but in a way that looked almost sorrowful, resigned. Her tail, usually held in a relaxed curve, gave one slow, heavy swish. She looked from the photo to me. Her green eyes held mine, and in them I saw a reflection of my own pain. Not pity, understanding, a shared language of loss etched in silent glances. Without a sound, she turned, not back to her sunny spot. She leaped down from the ledge, landing silently on the frost-stiffened grass of the courtyard. She didn't vanish under the lilac bush. Instead, she walked purposefully towards my building's back door, the one leading to the internal hallway and stairs. She stopped just before the steps and looked directly at my apartment door. Ground floor. Accessible. Then her gaze traveled upwards towards the first floor windows. Specifically, towards the window of what used to be Sarah's study. My spare room now. A room I hadn't properly entered in months. A room filled with boxes of things too painful to unpack, too loaded with memory to discard. A room that felt haunted by my ghosts. She wouldn't enter that room. She'd sit outside the closed door sometimes, a small, dark sentinel, but she never pawed at it, never tried to get in. It was the one place she seemed to actively avoid. Until now. Now, standing in the courtyard, she stared up at its window with that same unnerving intensity she'd given Sarah's photo. A silent accusation? A shared burden? The message was clear, wordless, and chilling. That room holds something. The scratching on the wall, the reaction to Sarah's photo, the fixation on the forbidden room. The pieces didn't form a picture. They formed a question mark. A deep, unsettling mystery that coiled around our fragile bond. The comfortable rhythm was shattered. The quiet companionship was now underscored by a rising tension, a sense of something hidden, something demanding to be seen. The phantom wasn't just a companion in solitude anymore. She was a key to a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. The wall she scratched at felt suddenly thin. The wall around my own heart felt dangerously close to crumbling. The turning point wasn't loud. It was the silent, heavy gaze of a phantom cat pointing towards a room full of ghosts. The hunt for understanding had just become infinitely more complex and infinitely more personal. What was she trying to tell me? What was I so desperately trying to hide, even from myself? The scratching in the night wasn't just on brick anymore. It was on the inside of my skull. The phantom's silent indictment hung in the air long after she'd melted back into the shadows. That room. Her gaze, fixed unerringly on the window of my untouched spare room, echoed in my mind like a struck gong. It wasn't just a room anymore. It was a mausoleum of might-have-beens, a physical manifestation of the wall I'd built around my own grief. And the scratching, the relentless, nightly scraping at that specific patch of brick, it felt connected. A physical counterpoint to my emotional paralysis. The tension wasn't just rising, it was a taut wire humming in the cold air, vibrating through the floorboards, resonating in my chest. I avoided the spare room door like it was electrified. Walking past it to the bathroom or kitchen became an exercise in averted eyes and held breath. The scratching, however, was inescapable. Night after night, it drilled into the quiet. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It wasn't just sound, it was accusation. Persistence. A demand. What did she know? What was buried behind that wall? What was buried inside me that I refused to face? The phantom, my silent companion, had become a silent tormentor, forcing me towards thresholds I desperately wanted to ignore. One freezing Tuesday, the tension snapped. It had been a day of jagged edges. A frustrating work call that echoed old failures. Mrs. Henderson complaining loudly in the hallway about vermin, casting a pointed glance towards my window ledge. The gray sky pressing down like a leaden lid. And the anticipation of the nightly scratching, already tightening my shoulders before dusk even fell. I stood in the dim living room, staring out at the courtyard where the weak afternoon light was already dying. The phantom sat on her ledge, watching me with those unnerving pale green eyes. Patient. Utterly certain. Enough. The word formed in my mind, cold and hard. Not shouted but settled. A decision born of sheer, unbearable pressure. I wasn't just going to open the spare room door. I was going to answer the scratching. Tonight, I owned a small, neglected toolbox. A relic from the house, from a time when fixing a leaky faucet felt like a shared victory, not a solitary chore. The weight of the claw hammer in my hand felt alien, dangerous. I hadn't wielded it in years. I carried it, along with a powerful flashlight, out into the bitter twilight of the courtyard. The air bit at my exposed skin. The security light flickered weakly on. And there was the spot. The base of the thick brick wall near the old garage. The mortar was visibly disturbed, scratched raw in a patch the size of my hand. Evidence of the phantom's obsession. I shone the flashlight beam directly onto the scarred brickwork. The scratches were deep, concentrated. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic counterpoint to the heavy silence. This felt like desecration, like violating a secret. What if there was nothing? What if I was just a lonely fool chasing shadows, literally? But the phantom's unwavering focus, her silent pointing towards the room upstairs, it felt like a truth I couldn't unsee. I raised the hammer. The first blow jarred my arm. A small chip of old, weathered brick flew off. Dust puffed into the cold air. I struck again. And again. Each blow felt like hitting myself, releasing something pent up and terrible. Brick fragments fell. Mortar crumbled. I wasn't thinking, just acting, driven by a desperate need to know, to silence the scratching both outside and in. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cold. My breath came in ragged gasps, visible in the flashlight beam. A hole began to form. Rough-edged, dark. I dropped the hammer, the clang loud in the stillness. Fell to my knees on the frost-hardened ground. Shoved my gloved hand into the opening, pulling out loose debris. The cavity behind wasn't large. Just a gap between the outer wall and the inner structure of the garage. Musty, cold air seeped out. I thrust the flashlight beam inside. Tucked deep into the corner of the cavity, sheltered from the worst of the elements but coated in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, was a small, coiled object. Not treasure, not bones. Something mundane, yet utterly devastating in its implication. I pulled it out. It was a collar, a cat collar. Faded blue nylon, the kind with a bell. The tiny bell was clogged with dirt, silent. And attached to it, a small, heart-shaped metal tag. I rubbed the grime away with my thumb, my hands trembling violently. The beam of the flashlight wavered over the engraved surface. Sarah's cat, Maya. The sweet, daft tortoiseshell we'd adopted as a kitten years ago. Sarah's shadow, Maya, who'd vanished without a trace 6 months before Sarah left me. We'd searched, put up posters, called shelters, blamed coyotes or a careless driver. We'd grieved her together, a shared ache that, in hindsight, was one of the last threads binding us before everything unraveled. Maya's disappearance had felt like the first crack in our foundation, and I'd buried the pain of it under the later, greater pain of losing Sarah. The phantom, her intense focus on this spot, her reaction to Sarah's photo, her avoidance of the spare room, the room where Maya's bed, her toys, her unused food bowl still sat, boxed away but present. She hadn't been scratching at a wall. She'd been scratching at a grave, or a hiding place. Had Maya crawled in here, scared, sick, injured, and never come out? Had the phantom, this wild, perceptive creature, somehow known? Sensed the lingering scent, the echo of loss trapped in the bricks? Had she been trying to reach her? To tell me? The dam broke. Not tears at first. A great, heaving wave of grief, so profound it was soundless. It ripped through me, tearing apart the careful numbness, the controlled despair. Maya. Sweet, purring Maya, gone, hidden here all along. Sarah. The shared grief we'd never properly mourned, which had festered into something else. My own failure. Failure to find Maya. Failure to see Sarah's pain. Failure to fight. Failure to be there. The guilt wasn't a bruise anymore. It was a canyon splitting me open. I curled over the dirty collar clutched in my fist, my shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. The cold ground seeped through my jeans. The night air bit my wet face. I was utterly shattered, kneeling in the dirt beside a hole in a wall, undone by a faded blue collar. I didn't hear her approach. Didn't see her until she was there. The phantom. She sat less than a foot away, on the frosty grass, facing me. Not on the wall, not observing from a distance. Right there, in the raw aftermath. Her charcoal fur was fluffed slightly against the cold, her pale green eyes fixed on my face. No judgment, no fear of my noisy grief, just presence. Deep, unwavering attention. Slowly, deliberately, she rose from her sitting position. Not to leave. She took one step closer, then another. Her movements were infinitely careful, deliberate. She stopped just beside my knee, where my hand, still clutching Maya's collar, rested limply on the ground. She lowered her head, not to sniff the collar, not to investigate the hole. She gently, ever so gently, pressed the top of her head against my clenched fist. A soft, solid pressure. A deliberate touch. Warm fur against cold skin. It wasn't affection as humans know it. It wasn't a demand. It was contact. Acknowledgement. A silent whisper in the language of shared suffering. I see your pain. I'm here. The dam burst completely. Great, heaving sobs tore from my throat, loud and ugly in the quiet courtyard. Tears streamed down my face, hot and relentless. I cried for Maya, lost and hidden. I cried for Sarah, and the love we'd broken. I cried for my own blindness, my own crushing guilt. And through it all, the phantom stayed. She didn't move. She kept her head pressed firmly against my fist, a small, warm anchor in the storm of my grief. Her eyes remained open, watching me, reflecting the weak security light and the sheer, unvarnished truth of my breakdown. She witnessed it all, held silent space for it. Her steady presence wasn't comforting in a warm, fuzzy way. It was grounding. A testament to resilience in the face of overwhelming loss. She endured my storm as she endured her own, without flinching. Eventually, the torrent slowed to a trickle. Exhaustion, profound and heavy, replaced the violent grief. I was hollowed out. But the crushing weight, it felt different. Lighter, somehow. Not gone, but shared. Borne witness to. I lifted my head, wiping my face with a rough, dirty sleeve. The phantom slowly lifted her head from my fist. She looked at me, her green eyes holding mine in the dim light. Then slowly, deliberately, she blinked. That same slow, meaningful blink. I see you. I'm here. We endure. She didn't linger. Having delivered her silent message, her quiet comfort, she turned with her usual liquid grace and slipped soundlessly back into the shadows beneath the lilac bush. Gone. Leaving me alone in the cold courtyard, kneeling beside a hole in the wall, Maya's collar still clutched in my hand. But I wasn't alone. Not really. The raw connection forged in that moment of shared vulnerability was thicker than blood. She had seen me broken, truly broken, and hadn't fled. She had offered the only comfort she knew, silent, steadfast presence. A pawless touch, a blink that spoke volumes. In her fierce, solitary resilience, I saw a reflection of what I needed to become. Not unscarred, not unburdened, but enduring, capable of facing the hidden things. The collar in my hand wasn't just Maya's. It was a key to the room upstairs, to the boxed-up grief, to the truth I'd been hiding from. The release wasn't joy. It was the agonizing, necessary relief of a wound finally lanced. The wall was breached. The ghosts were named. And a phantom cat had shown me the terrifying, liberating power of being truly seen, even in your utter ruin. The echo of her soft headpress lingered on my skin, warmer than any words could ever be. The emotional climax wasn't a shout. It was a silent touch in the dark, witnessed by crumbling brick and the indifferent stars. The truth was out. Now came the living with it. The cold ground of the courtyard had seeped into my bones that night. Not just the physical chill of November, but the deeper cold of grief fully embraced, finally named. Kneeling there, Maya's faded collar gritty in my palm, the phantom's quiet warmth still a phantom sensation against my skin, the world hadn't ended. It had cracked open. The raw, howling pain had subsided, leaving behind a hollowed-out ache, yes, but also a strange, unexpected clarity. Like the air after a thunderstorm, bruised, but washed clean. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the worn sofa, Maya's collar on the coffee table beside a glass of water I didn't drink. The hole in the courtyard wall gaped like a wound in the weak morning light when I finally looked out. I'd filled it roughly with loose bricks before coming inside, a clumsy patch job. It felt necessary. Not to hide the truth, but to mark it. To say, something happened here. Something was found. Maya. Sweet, chaotic Maya. Her disappearance hadn't caused the rift with Sarah, but it had been a fissure, a shared sorrow we'd papered over with busyness and then, later, with silence. We hadn't grieved her together, not really. We just stopped talking about her. Stopped looking. The guilt of that abandonment, of Maya, and then, in a different way, of each other, had festered beneath the surface of my loneliness. Finding her collar, it wasn't closure. It was an opening. A door kicked down by a phantom cat with relentless claws. The spare room door felt different that morning. Less like a barrier, more like a threshold. I stood before it, a hand hovering over the cool brass knob. The phantom was on her ledge, watching me through the glass. Not intently, not urging. Just present. Observing. Her green eyes held a calm expectancy. She'd done her part. Now it was mine. I turned the knob. Pushed the door open. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through the drawn blinds. The room smelled of cardboard, old paper, and the faint, ghostly scent of catnip from a long-unused toy. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, Sarah's things I hadn't been able to part with, things I hadn't known what to do with. My own indecision, boxed and stored. And there, tucked beside my old university textbooks, was Maya's box. A simple plastic storage bin. I hadn't opened it since packing it, months ago. My throat tightened, but the paralyzing dread was gone. Replaced by a quiet, necessary sorrow. I sat on the dusty floor. Lifted the lid. The familiar scent washed over me. A blend of synthetic fleece, dried catnip, and that indefinable smell of Maya. Her purple bed, worn thin in her favorite sleeping spot. A jingle ball, feathers bedraggled. A crinkly tunnel she'd love to ambush from. Her ceramic food bowl, the one with little fish painted on the bottom. And her water fountain, unplugged and silent. Holding each item was like touching a memory. Not all sharp edges anymore. Sarah laughing as Maya chased the laser pointer across the living room rug. Maya curling up on Sarah's lap while she read, purring like a tiny engine. The frantic search when she vanished, the posters, the calls, the dwindling hope. The shared tears in the kitchen when we finally admitted she wasn't coming home. I cried again. Quietly this time. Tears of regret, yes, but also of love. Of finally acknowledging the sweet, daft creature who'd shared our lives. The guilt was still there. The guilt of giving up, of letting the grief morph into something that pushed Sarah and me further apart. But it wasn't crushing. It was a weight I could carry now. Because I was seeing it, holding it, naming it. I didn't unpack the whole box. But I took out Maya's bed. I shook it out, releasing a cloud of dust and memories. I placed it near the radiator in the spare room. Not tucked away. Visible. Acknowledged. I plugged in her water fountain. The gentle burble filled the silent room, a sound both achingly familiar and strangely comforting. Life, flowing again. I placed her food bowl beside it. Empty, but present. Later, I placed a fresh saucer of food on the ledge. The phantom appeared almost instantly, as if she'd been waiting just out of sight. She ate with her usual quiet efficiency. But afterwards, instead of lingering on the ledge or vanishing, she did something new. She looked past me, through the open window, into the apartment. Her gaze traveled past the living room, towards the open door of the spare room, towards the sound of the burbling fountain. She didn't move to enter. But her posture, it wasn't avoidance anymore. It was recognition, acceptance, perhaps, of the space now inhabited by memory. Life moved forward, but the axis had shifted. The gray numbness that had coated my days began to recede, like fog burning off under a winter sun. It wasn't replaced by sudden joy, but by a quieter, more sustainable feeling, presence. I started working at my desk again, not constantly tethered to the courtyard window. The phantom adapted. She still came for meals, often lingering on the ledge, sometimes napping in the weak afternoon sun if it found its way through the grime. But the frantic nightly scratching at the wall, it stopped. Completely. Her compulsion, it seemed, had been answered. The mystery laid bare. Her energy seemed calmer, more settled. She'd occasionally sit near the patched section of brick, not scratching, just sitting, as if keeping vigil, or simply acknowledging the place where one story ended and another began. My routines changed. I began cleaning the apartment properly. Not just surface tidying, but a deeper cleanse. Dusting shelves Sarah had chosen. Vacuuming corners Maya had loved to hide in. It wasn't erasure. It was integration. Making space for the memories to exist without suffocating the present. I started cooking simple meals again, the smells of onions and garlic replacing the stale scent of takeout. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was companionable, filled with the ticking clock, the radiator's hum, the fountain's burble, and the soft sounds of the city beyond. One frosty December morning, I woke early. The world outside was painted in shades of gray and white, a fresh dusting of snow softening the city's edges. I padded into the living room, drawn by habit and a quiet hope, to check the ledge. She was there. The phantom, curled in a tight, charcoal circle on the cold concrete, just outside the glass. But she wasn't asleep. Her pale green eyes were open, watching the snow fall with that same unnerving stillness. I moved to the window, slowly. She didn't startle. She just turned her head, looked at me through the glass, and blinked. Slowly, deliberately. "I see you. We are here." I made tea, sat at the table near the window, sipping the hot, fragrant liquid, watching the snow and the small, wild creature sharing the dawn with me. The ache for Sarah was still a quiet hum, a familiar chord in the song of my life. The sorrow for Maya, a tender spot. But they weren't the whole song anymore. The phantom wasn't a replacement, she was a separate note, complex and beautiful in her own right. A testament to resilience, to the unexpected ways life stitches itself back together. Later that day, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I picked up my phone, scrolled through contacts, my thumb hovering for a long moment. Then I pressed call. It rang 3 times. Hello. Sarah's voice. Familiar, yet changed by time and distance. Guarded. Sarah? It's Leo. My voice sounded rough and used. I found Maya's collar. Where? The mystery wasn't entirely solved. Where had the phantom come from? Why had she chosen this courtyard, this wall? Those questions lingered, softened now by acceptance. Some things remained unknowable, wrapped in the quiet enigma of a small, charcoal cat. But the profound mystery, the one that had bound my grief to a brick wall and a closed door, was resolved. There was peace in that. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of understanding. The spare room wasn't a haunted place anymore. It was a room with a cat bed, a burbling fountain, and an open door. The courtyard wall bore a patch, a visible scar, a testament to a search finally ended. And on a cold windowsill, a phantom had become a fixture, a silent companion in the quiet, ongoing work of healing. The gray drift had found its anchor, not in forgetting, but in remembering and choosing to step out of the shadows. The circle wasn't closed, but it was finally whole. Life, after the breaking point, wasn't about erasure. It was about integration. The spare room, once a tomb of grief, now hummed with the soft life of Maya's fountain. Her bed sat near the radiator, a small, purple island of memory. I'd even framed Sarah's beach photo, the one that had triggered the phantom's profound reaction, placing it on the bookshelf beside a small, smooth stone I'd found near the patched wall. Not a shrine, but an acknowledgement. A way of saying you were here. You mattered. The phantom seemed to approve. She'd occasionally pause on the ledge, her gaze drifting past me into the open doorway of the room, resting for a moment on the fountain or the photo. Her stillness held a different quality now, not avoidance, but a quiet observance. Acceptance. As if the room's ghosts had finally been laid to rest, or at least, invited to coexist peacefully. Haltingly, carefully, like explorers crossing a fragile bridge. The conversation sparked by Maya's collar hadn't magically fixed things. How could it? Too much water under a broken bridge. But it had cleared the silt. We spoke of Maya, the real, goofy, purring cat, not the symbol of our failure. We shared memories we'd buried, laughed at her antics, cried for her loss anew, but this time, together, even across the phone lines. It was a shared mourning, finally. It didn't rekindle romance, but it doused the lingering embers of resentment with a bittersweet rain. We were finding a new frequency, not husband and wife, but two people who had loved deeply, lost profoundly, and were finally learning to hold the pieces without cutting each other. The guilt, while not vanished, lost its razor edges. It became a scar I could touch without flinching, a reminder, not a sentence. The phantom's routine became the comforting backbone of my days. Dawn on the ledge, often watching the sunrise paint the snow-dusted rooftops in hues of rose and gold. A shared meal. Her quiet presence while I worked. Twilight often found her curled on the ledge, A small, dark comma against the fading light, the rhythmic rise and fall of her breathing visible in the cold air. She never sought to come inside. The open window crack seemed her boundary, and she respected it fiercely. Her independence was part of her essence, her wild dignity. I respected it too. Our bond existed in that liminal space, neither fully wild nor tame, built on silent understanding and shared weathered storms. She wasn't a pet. She was a companion of circumstance. A fellow traveler who'd shown me the way through my own dark alley. Then came the freeze. A brutal Arctic front clamped down on the city, turning the damp November chill into a knife-edged January deep freeze. Temperatures plummeted, the kind that made the old building's pipes groan in protest and turned the courtyard into a wind-scoured, glittering wasteland. Snow, dry and powdery, squeaked underfoot. The air hurt to breathe. Concern, a cold knot in my stomach, joined my daily rituals. The Phantom's charcoal fur, while thick, wasn't designed for this. Her usual shelters, the lilac bush, the gap under the garage eave, offered little protection against the biting wind that howled through the courtyard like a vengeful spirit. I doubled her food, adding extra fat. Left the window open a fraction wider, hoping the feeble heat escaping might offer some warmth to the ledge. I even rigged a small, insulated shelter just below the ledge, tucked against the building's foundation, lined with old towels and a microwavable heat pad I refreshed hourly. She used it. I'd see her emerge from its depths, blinking in the weak daylight, her fur fluffed against the cold. But the fierce independence in her eyes never dimmed. She accepted the shelter, the extra food, but on her terms. Still, the sight of her small form braving the brutal cold twisted something inside me. The vulnerability she'd witnessed in me, I now felt keenly for her. One night, the coldest yet, I awoke with a start. Not to the Phantom's silent presence, but to a sound. A faint, high-pitched, desperate sound. Not a meow. A wail. Thin. Piercing. Coming from the courtyard. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through me. The Phantom? Injured? Trapped? I stumbled out of bed, heart hammering, grabbing the heavy flashlight. I didn't bother with a coat, just yanked on boots over my pajamas and shoved the window open wide, the frozen air hitting me like a physical blow. The security light was feeble, swallowed by the deep cold. My beam swept the familiar terrain, the snow-drifted lilac bush, the patched wall, the shelter I'd made empty. The wail came again. Sharper. Closer. It wasn't coming from the ground. My beam traveled up to the ledge. And there, beside the Phantom, who sat upright, alert, her green eyes reflecting the light like frozen chips of glass, was the source of the sound. A kitten. Tiny. Impossibly small. A little puff of fur barely bigger than my hand, huddled against the Phantom's side. Its fur was a chaotic mix of black, white, and ginger, matted with snow. It was shivering violently, its eyes screwed shut, mouth open in that thin, terrified wail. The Phantom wasn't touching it, not cuddling it. She was simply beside it, a solid, dark presence in the frozen night. Her body was angled slightly, perhaps offering a meager windbreak. Her gaze, when it flicked from the kitten to my flashlight beam, held no maternal softness, only her usual intense focus, and something else. A fierce protectiveness? A demand? Okay, it's okay, little one. Hang on. Reaching out onto that frozen ledge felt like plunging my arms into liquid nitrogen. The kitten didn't resist as I gently scooped it up. It was a bundle of ice-cold fur and sharp bones, still wailing, a pitiful, vibrating weight. The phantom watched, unmoving, as I pulled the tiny creature inside, cradling it against my chest, trying to impart some warmth through my thin pajamas. I slammed the window shut, the warmth of the apartment hitting us like a wall. The next hour was a blur of controlled panic. Wrapping the ice cube kitten in soft towels. Filling a hot water bottle, wrapping it in another towel. The microwave heat pad. Gentle rubbing to stimulate circulation. The tiny thing felt lifeless, barely breathing. Its cries had subsided into weak, intermittent whimpers. I worked by the dim light of a lamp, my hands trembling, not just from cold but from fear. The phantom remained outside, a silhouette against the glass, watching. Always watching. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, warmth began to seep back into the tiny body. The shivering intensified, a good sign. Then, a miracle, a faint, rumbling vibration started against my palm where I cradled it. A purr. Weak, thready, but unmistakable. Life, stubbornly clinging on. Its eyes opened, one a startlingly bright blue, the other a warm amber, wide with residual terror but also a dawning awareness of warmth and safety. It nuzzled weakly against the towel. I looked up through the glass. The phantom still sat on the frozen ledge. Snow dusted her back, but she held her ground. Our eyes met. In the dim light, her slow blink was deliberate, profound. It wasn't just "I see you." This one is yours now. Then, with the same liquid grace she'd always possessed, she turned and leaped down into the snow, vanishing towards her shelter. Her job, it seemed, was done. The gift wasn't just the kitten, a tiny life rescued from the frozen brink. It was the revelation embedded in the phantom's silent act. She hadn't brought me astray. She'd brought me permission. Permission to care again, fiercely and vulnerably. Permission to open my heart to another creature, knowing the risk of loss, but embracing the imperative of compassion. She'd shown me her own fierce capacity for recognizing need, for intervening, even when it meant crossing her own boundaries to bring that need to the one place she trusted it could be met. My ledge. My window. She'd witnessed my capacity for grief, and now she bore witness to my capacity for nurture. She trusted me with this fragile life. The kitten, a little ginger patch on its forehead like a misplaced ember, needed a name. Ember? Too obvious. I looked at its mismatched eyes, one sky, one earth. I thought of the phantom, appearing out of the gray. The bringer of this unexpected, demanding, life-affirming gift. The name came quiet and sure, Echo. A reflection. A continuation. A small sound answering a profound silence. Echo slept in a makeshift nest of towels near the radiator, purring like a miniature engine, the sound weaving with the burble of Maya's fountain. A new rhythm. Outside, the world remained locked in ice. But inside, warmth radiated, physical and emotional. The phantom hadn't given me a replacement for Maya or for Sarah. She'd given me a testament. Proof that love isn't a finite resource depleted by loss, but a wellspring that can be tapped anew, sometimes in the most unexpected, frozen moments. She'd brought me Echo, and in doing so, she'd shown me the enduring shape of my own heart. Not broken beyond repair, but expanded. Scarred, yes, but still capable of holding warmth, of answering a desperate cry in the dark. The final reveal wasn't a hidden object or a long-lost truth. It was the quiet, purring confirmation that healing wasn't an endpoint, but a continuous opening. And it had arrived, tiny and shivering, on a phantom's frozen ledge. Winter loosened its grip, inch by frozen inch. The brutal cold surrendered to a tentative, watery sunlight that struggled to warm the brick and concrete. Snowdrifts shrank, revealing patches of dormant grass and the rough patch on the courtyard wall, now dusted with grimy slush. Inside, the air hummed with a different kind of energy. Echo, the tiny, mismatched-eyed gift from the frozen ledge, was a whirlwind contained in soft fur. His chaotic tuxedo coat, black, white, splashes of ginger like scattered embers, seemed a visual metaphor for his personality, equal parts frantic energy and sudden, profound snuggles. The weak, thready purr that had first signaled his return to life had blossomed into a robust, rumbling engine that vibrated through your hands when you held him. He explored his world, my world now, with fearless curiosity, tumbling over discarded socks, batting at dust motes in sunbeams, scaling the sofa with tiny, needle-sharp claws. Maya's fountain fascinated him. He'd sit beside it, mesmerized by the dancing water, one blue eye, one amber eye wide with wonder. Her old, crinkly tunnel became his fortress, his ambush point. He'd burst from it in a flurry of paws and squeaks, launching himself at imaginary foes or my trailing shoelaces. The apartment wasn't silent anymore. It echoed with tiny thuds, skittering paws, inquisitive chirps, and that constant, comforting purr. The ghosts hadn't vanished. They'd simply made room for the vibrant, demanding present. The phantom watched it all. From her ledge. Always from her ledge. She observed Echo's antics through the glass with her usual unnerving stillness, those pale green eyes tracking his chaotic movements. There was no jealousy, no territorial aggression. Just observation. Sometimes, when Echo would press his tiny nose against the glass, mewing plaintively at her, she'd blink slowly. A silent, regal acknowledgement. She'd brought him here, delivered him from the frozen dark, but she remained steadfastly, gloriously wild. Her domain was the liminal space, the ledge, the courtyard shadows, the top of the brick wall where she'd sit like a sentinel, surveying her territory. Echo's arrival hadn't changed her essential nature. If anything, it seemed to cement her role. She was the guardian of thresholds. The bridge between the wild and the tame, the past and the present, the hidden and the seen. Healing, I learned, wasn't a straight line. It was more like Echo's path through the apartment, loops, detours, sudden leaps, moments of profound stillness curled in a sunbeam. Some mornings, the ache for Sarah would resurface, sharp and unexpected, triggered by the smell of coffee she used to drink, or a song on the radio. I'd feel the familiar pull of the gray numbness, the urge to retreat. But then Echo would cannonball into my lap, purring like a malfunctioning motorbike, demanding attention with insistent headbutts. Or I'd look out the window and see the phantom, sitting perfectly still on the ledge, her gaze meeting mine with that ancient, knowing calm. They anchored me, not by erasing the pain, but by demanding presence. Be here, Echo's playful bite seemed to say. Now, the phantom's slow blink echoed. The sorrow for Maya was still a tender place, but touching it no longer brought the crippling guilt. It brought memories, bittersweet and precious, of a goofy tortoiseshell who loved feather toys and sleeping on warm laptops. I'd talk to Echo about her. Maya used to do that too, I'd murmur as he chased his tail. He'd pause, cock his head with his mismatched eyes, then pounce again, a living testament to the continuity of life, of love's ability to find new shapes. Sarah and I continued talking. The conversations were easier now, laced with a fragile but genuine friendship. We spoke of practicalities, dividing remaining belongings from the house, finalizing paperwork that had lingered like a bad smell. But we also spoke of ordinary things. The unrelenting rain. A funny thing we'd seen. Echo's latest escapade, she'd asked for pictures, and her laugh when she saw his mismatched eyes was a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed. We didn't talk about us anymore. That chapter was closed, its ending rewritten not into a happy ever after, but into a peaceful, respectful the end. We were learning to be Leo and Sarah, again, separate entities bound by shared history and a hard-won, quiet affection. The canyon of guilt had been bridged, not filled, but traversable. The phantom, I realized, hadn't just helped me find Maya's collar. She'd helped me find a way back to myself. A self capable of holding complexity without collapsing. Capable of loving Sarah differently. Capable of loving a tiny, chaotic kitten completely. One bright, surprisingly warm Saturday afternoon in early March, there was a knock. Echo scrambled under the sofa, a blur of black and white. I opened the door. Sarah stood there, holding a small, slightly battered cardboard box. Her hair was shorter. She looked lighter. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, but they were lines of weathering, not just sorrow. "Hi, Leo." "Sarah. Come in." She stepped inside, her gaze sweeping the room, taking in the clean surfaces, the open door to the spare room, Maya's fountain burbling, the framed beach photo. Her eyes landed on Echo, who had cautiously emerged from under the sofa and was regarding her with wide-eyed suspicion from behind a table leg. A small, genuine smile touched Sarah's lips. "So this is the famous Echo." "That's him. Master of chaos and purring." She held out the box. "I was going through the last of the storage unit. Found these. Thought, maybe Echo could use them? Or you might want them." Her voice was careful, neutral. I took the box, opened the flaps. Inside were Maya's toys. The ones we hadn't packed away, the slightly chewed stuffed mouse she'd carried everywhere, the feather wand with most of its feathers missing, the little fuzzy ball on a string. Objects saturated with memory. I lifted out the mouse. It still held the faint, dusty scent of catnip and Maya. I looked from the worn mouse to Sarah, then down at Echo, who was now cautiously sniffing the air near the box, intrigued. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice rough. "That means a lot." She nodded, her eyes bright. "I'm glad he has you, Leo." "I'm glad you have him." She paused, then added, softly, "And her. The phantom. I saw her on the wall outside. He's something else." Sarah didn't stay long. We had tea. Talked about mundane things. Echo eventually decided she wasn't a threat and batted tentatively at her shoelace, earning another smile. When she left, it wasn't with the old weight of unresolved pain. It felt complete. A final piece gently slotted into place. The gift wasn't just the toys. It was the closure, the unspoken blessing, the acknowledgement that we had both moved through the fire and emerged, scarred but whole, on the other side. Later, as the setting sun painted the courtyard in long, golden shadows, I stood by the bay window. Echo was curled asleep in Maya's old bed near the radiator, the battered stuffed mouse tucked under his chin, purring contentedly. On the ledge, the phantom sat. She wasn't looking at me. She was gazing out at the brick wall, the patched section clearly visible in the dying light. She seemed contemplative, at peace. Her nightly vigil was over. The mystery she'd scratched at, the loss she'd somehow sensed and insisted be acknowledged, had been laid to rest. Her job was done. Yet she remained. That's the thing about phantoms. Sometimes they stop being ghosts and become guides. Sometimes they stop haunting and start anchoring. She hadn't given me easy answers or erased my scars. She hadn't filled the Sarah-shaped space or replaced Maya. She hadn't even stayed. Not in the way I might have once naively wished. She remained exactly what she always was: wild, independent, enigmatic. A creature of thresholds. But she'd shown me the way back to my own humanity. She'd forced me to look at the wall I was scratching in the dark, the room I was too afraid to open. She'd witnessed my utter ruin and hadn't turned away. She'd brought me a tiny, frozen life, trusting me to warm it. She'd reminded me that love isn't a finite well, but a spring that finds new cracks to surface even in the most frozen ground. Life isn't about avoiding the storms. We all have our courtyards in the rain, our walls we scratch at in the dark, our rooms full of ghosts. It's about finding the phantoms who see you, truly see you in your solitude. The ones who blink slowly across the divide. The ones who sit beside you in the howling wind, a silent testament to endurance. The ones who bring you tiny, shivering gifts that crack your heart wide open all over again. It's about learning that healing isn't forgetting. It's weaving the scars into the fabric of who you become. It's about the courage to open the window, even when the cold threatens to bite. It's about recognizing the lifeline, however wild and unexpected its form. The phantom turned her head. Her pale green eyes caught the last of the sun, glowing like captured moonlight. She looked at me, held my gaze, and slowly, deliberately blinked. That ancient, silent language, "I see you. We endure." She didn't vanish. She just sat, a fixture on the ledge, a wild heart anchored beside mine. A reminder that sometimes the most profound connections aren't about holding on, but about bearing witness, about showing up, about the quiet, unwavering presence that says, even in the deepest winter, you are not alone. The light finds a way. And the warmth always returns. The story of the phantom cat isn't just mine. It's a whisper in the dark for anyone who's ever felt unseen, who's carried a hidden grief, who's wondered if the light could ever break through again. If her silent journey, her fierce love, her mysterious gift resonated with you, if it sparked a memory, a hope, a tear, then share this moment. Let others know they're not alone in their own courtyards. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next tale of ordinary magic and extraordinary hearts. Drop a comment below. Tell me about the phantom that walked into your life. And tap that bell icon, because every single day brings a new story waiting to unfold, a new connection waiting to be made, a new whisper of warmth in the silent places. Let's find them together.